Cloudflare's CEO, this is a $70 billion company, by the way, just sorted all employees into three groups. Two groups are safe from being replaced by AI, but one group is not. In this video, you'll be able to see which group you fall in, and also we'll dive deeper into his thought process because there are some really interesting details. This Cloudflare example is so interesting for two reasons. One, the Cloudflare CEO came out and said himself, "We haven't found another example in US business history of a public company growing at more than 30% that laid off more than 20% of its workforce." That's important because most people associate AI layoffs with a company that is struggling. So that is an interesting point. The second one, which I think arguably is more interesting for me, is with all of the layoffs that have been happening right now, this is the first time a CEO has came out and let us look into the black box of how he thinks about which employees that he decided to lay off. That I think is so fascinating because that process and procedure is kept so under wraps that you never get to really fully understand what was the thought process that went behind it. So this is a $70 billion company that is letting us under the hood so that we can see how he specifically thought about which employees to lay off and which employees to keep. And to me, that's like so fascinating. Now, let's dive into those actual categories and let's dive into those actual categories so that we can better understand how they're broken out. What's so fascinating is to understand who Matthew Prince, which is the name of the CEO of Cloudflare, refers to a book written by Peter Drucker in the 1950s. That book is called The Practice of Management. If you're in the business world, a lot of people reference this book, so it's quite popular in those circles. In the book, Drucker describes different types of employees and how he thinks about categorizing them. Prince takes the information from the book and creates these categories, which he uses at Cloudflare. Those categories are builders, and sellers. In Prince's own words, to understand who is affected by artificial intelligence, we must categorize every corporate role into one of these three structural functions: those who build, those who sell, and those who measure. Let's jump into the first group, which are the builders. Here, it's pretty straightforward. These are the people who are actually responsible for building things in an organization. What's fascinating about the role of a builder is thinking about what is the impact of AI on their job. Prince puts it as their role is amplified, it is not replaced. Logically, if a role is amplified and an engineer on a team can be 10 times more productive, the rational response is to hire as many as you can find. If you think about what roles fit under builders, you have the people in engineering, product design, manufacturing, basically any job that starts from having nothing to building something, whether that is software or whether that is hardware. So in Cloudflare's case, obviously they're a software company, so their builders would be a lot of the software engineers, but also they have to build the technical infrastructure. And so those engineers that work on that infrastructure are safe as well. The second group, which are the sellers, was probably the most interesting to me. Here, Prince makes the argument that humans still control the capital flow in a company, and they demand to buy from other humans who will take accountability when things go wrong. What's interesting is there are a lot of different functions that a sales organization has. And one thing I would say that I personally disagree with Prince on here is before, for the builders, he framed the impact of AI on their jobs as amplification. But here, he doesn't talk about that same amplification impact for people in a sales organization in the same way. He basically just says they're safe from extinction. But in my opinion, and I would love to hear what you guys think, I think a sales organization can be equally amplified by AI, if not even more. And there's so much technology being built specifically for sales organizations that I don't see how that couldn't be the case. But I could be wrong. And obviously, I am not CEO of a $70 billion company. So if you think about what functions exist in this group of quote unquote sellers, pretty straightforward. You have sales managers, sales account management, customer success, people where you cannot replace the human facing aspect of the role, even if it could be technically quote unquote more efficient. Is someone going to purchase a 70 million enterprise contract from an AI chatbot or an AI talking to them over the phone? Probably not. But now let's get into the third group, which are the measurers. And these are the people that Prince mainly focused on for the layoffs at Cloudflare. Measures is sort of an ambiguous term. And I spent some time really trying to understand what roles fit into that categorization. You pretty much can think about it as anything that is not building or selling. So let's think about the example of middle management. Well, if you think about the way middle management works, you have the person requesting the work, and then you have the middle manager, and then you have the analysts actually doing the work. Well, all the middle manager is doing is playing telephone from his or her boss to the analyst to do the work. That layer, I think, is most at risk of getting replaced by AI because now, and we're going to see this in another slide soon, the number of people that you can have reporting to you is actually amplified so much by AI. So maybe before you'd feel comfortable managing 5 or 10 people, but now maybe you can double that amount or triple it using AI, which is so fascinating. Some of the other things that Prince spoke about in regards to measures are the best are hard to find, and they work tirelessly without front of house recognition and provide independent perspective. That's great, but if you think about what actually drives real results in an organization, it's the builders and it's the sellers. And that is the root to which Prince is trying to get at, which is so interesting. Let's look at the 3 groups in a matrix because I think, at least for me, it's easier to picture it in this way. So you have the builders, sellers, and measurers. Well, what's fascinating here is that you can simplify it to first principles. So the core function of the builders are to create value, and the core function of sellers are to capture value. Once you have those 2 things in place, then you have an organization that can generate revenue. But before, you had this third group of measures, which are people that quote unquote audited and administered value. But I feel so bad, but the issue with that is measures have the highest vulnerability level to get replaced by AI. Because if you think about the work that they do, that is the work that AI literally was made for, because AI can work 24/7 and it can work without mistakes. So you think about this ability to replace an entire organization or entire team of measurers with one AI agent. The case for the business is so strong in that sense. And I kind of agree with Prince in how he's thinking about this, and I can't blame him. If you want a practical example of the role of a measure, I think these 2 graphs do a good job at explaining what that role essentially boils down to. So if you think about it, the graph on the left represents how much a human can work. And let's say that specific role that we're talking about in this example is closing the books, which is an accounting term or finance term, once a quarter. So once a quarter, the human will go in and work for 1, 2, or 3 weeks for a sprint and then close the books, quote unquote. And that happens every quarter because if it was every day or every week, there's no way a human being could do that. Well, what's fascinating is now if you transition that role to an AI, you don't have this once a quarter cadence anymore. It's literally 24/7. And what's fascinating is that if you think about the human example, so say this represents quarter 2, you try to close the books, but you recognize something that doesn't reconcile between quarter one and quarter two, but you already missed it because it already happened, and say you're 2 months behind on catching the issue. Well, here, continuous auditing by the implementation of AI for this role would catch it in real time. And I cannot begin to describe the amount of value capture that creates for a firm to be able to recognize these things as they happen versus having to wait 1, 2, 3 months after the fact to catch it. It's actually so fascinating, and I appreciate the way that Prince described it here because I completely agree. What's fascinating is that in parallel to the layoffs, Cloudflare holds a record number of open positions. You think about, okay, how does that make sense? How can they lay off 20% of their workforce while also having a record number of open positions? Well, it fundamentally has to do with the people that are currently getting hired in the economy that we live in. All of the people that are slated to get full-time positions from their current internships at Cloudflare are AI native. And those words come directly from Prince. So we're at an interesting point in the economy where a person really has to build their skills from the ground up if they want to be able to succeed in where things are going. And I know that's going to be painful, and I know that sucks, but I hope there can be some optimism. Yes, it's going to be hard, but it's not impossible. And if you think about it, these are people that are doing internships, and these people just graduated college probably. But the thing is, they're coming into the workforce with a blank slate of how to work. So if they come in with that blank slate and start by being AI native, they're going to have such a leg up on everyone who has been working 10, 15, 20 years and stuck in their old ways. And this is just a guess, and it's kind of conjecture, but part of my assumption is that part of the measurers that got laid off were hesitant or reluctant for whatever reason to adopt the skills to quote unquote become AI native. What's that quote? It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. And I think that might be relevant here. That's it for this video. I hope you found it interesting. I work in advanced analytics at an investment firm, and I like making YouTube videos.